shadow government and go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, on the other side of the camera, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer. I want to thank everyone for participating and joining us today. We have no dumbest bill in America, but we are building up a nice reservoir of dumbest bills. Those will be coming soon enough. Not to worry, we'll be going back to that. That's because legislatures, for the most part, aren't in session because we're in the Christmas season. And as soon as they are back in session, I can assure you they're going to put in lots of dumb bills. So we're calling this podcast Shadow Government. And first up, we have Chris Wallace has President-elect meltdown. Let me say that again. Chris Wallace has President-elect meltdown. What does that mean? Well, Chris Wallace, who hosts Fox News Sunday, had a complete meltdown on Sunday because Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar wasn't using the term President-elect to refer to Joe Biden. So why does that matter? It really, you can just tell how far left Chris Wallace is and how badly Chris Wallace wants to get rid of Donald Trump, including before Donald Trump actually is supposed to leave office on January 20th. Nonetheless, we have a number of, two clips with Chris Wallace with his interview with Health and Human Services Alex Azar. And it's just ridiculous because Azar just wants to go on the show to talk about, where we are today with coronavirus, where we are with respect to the various vaccines and the companies that are manufacturing them, as well as his recommendations to the American people to stay safe throughout this winter, which there, of course, supposed to be a large surge and surges across the country with coronavirus. I mean, there already are. We know that. Nonetheless, Chris Wallace is more concerned about playing gotcha still with Donald Trump and Alex Azar, as well as the Trump supporters. We're going to talk about this, but first up, here is Chris Wallace with the clip. You got to see it.
If President Trump had worn a mask then and urged everyone to wear a mask then, back in April, the way Joe Biden is right now, wouldn't we be in much better shape?
Well, Chris, I welcome Vice President Biden to the club. Since the middle of April, the president's guidelines for reopening have called for wearing masks.
President-elect, sir.
The president has called the president has called masks patriotic acts. Every one of his top advisors, we are out there saying wear your mask. We talk about the data. Chris, at 1 meter, if two people wear the mask, it can reduce viral transmission by 72%, protecting both the source and the recipient. We've got the data. Masks work. We encourage people, please wear a mask when you can't engage in social distancing.
But first of all, it's the president-elect Joe Biden, Secretary Azar.
Did you hear that? I mean, can you believe that? Chris Wallace is more concerned about how Vice President Joe Biden is addressed in an interview than he is actually getting the information from the HHS Secretary, Alex Azar. I mean, it's just incredible. And so The Hill writes about this, and just to repeat, The Hill newspaper says that before Azar could even finish, Wallace kept interjecting, "He's the president-elect, sir. He's the president-elect." Well, you just heard it. It's just ridiculous because, as we know and as we have said on Mark and the Millennials, as it says in the United States Constitution, once the Electoral College votes, then we have a president-elect. Not until then. You have an election before then, and that election determines that there is a winner or likely winner. This is all being disputed now. By the way, 4 years ago, it was disputed as well. But we have a process, and the process is playing out exactly as the Constitution tells us it's supposed to play out. And yet, good old Chris Wallace can't handle the fact that Alex Azar, the Health and Human Services Secretary, is actually saying that the vice president, referring to Joe Biden as the vice president and not the president-elect. I mean, it's just incredible. And then, just to give you the entire interview between Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday and Alex Azar, Chris Wallace continues to lay into Alex Azar saying, well, it's your fault that the president just had this rally in Georgia for the Senate runoff races, because there are two senators who have a runoff race for the 2 Senate races in Georgia. And the president had a rally there, and the president wasn't wearing a mask, and the people weren't wearing a mask who were at his rally. Really, all of this misses the point. But nonetheless, we have that clip as well, and here it is.
And secondly, the fact is the president said on the first day, April 3rd, he wasn't going to wear a mask. He didn't wear a mask in public for 3 months until July. And just last night at that rally in Georgia, not only didn't he wear a mask, but I was watching the rally, thousands of people packed together, none I could see wearing a mask. That is a direct violation of what the CDC and you are recommending.
Yeah, so it probably is a direct violation. In fact, it is a direct violation of the CDC recommendations. Key words, ladies and gentlemen. These are recommendations, right? We are recommending, the CDC is, and Alex Azar is, that you wear a mask. It is definitely better for your health, according to the CDC and according to Alex Azar, who gave statistics about what happens when you wear a mask and that you are more protected. What they don't do, as we've said before in this podcast, is actually tell you that there are some masks that actually are significantly more safe than other masks. They never really talk about that, which I find fascinating. But nonetheless, Chris Wallace has to constantly go after this issue. Chris Wallace doesn't seem to understand. He doesn't seem to understand the basic point of American freedom, and that is you get to go outside to a rally knowing full well that it's possible and including maybe even more probable, probably is, right, more probable that you will get coronavirus or other kinds of viruses as a result of being amongst many thousands of people closely packed together. And you get to decide whether you want to take that risk. And you get to decide whether that risk makes sense for you, depending on who is home in your who lives in your home. Because you're going to go home to people in your household. And of course, if you get coronavirus, you're going to potentially give it to them in your home. Makes perfect sense. Except that you get to make that choice. You get to make that choice. And this is what is missing. And Chris Wallace, he just comes off as so virtuous, you know? It's like he knows better, and how dare the President of the United States have a rally? Folks, we are, in this nation, in a fight for our very nation's life, for our very nation's Constitution. And these 2 Senate races matter more than anything else, because if indeed, on December the 14th, we have a President-elect Joe Biden, if we do, and then we have a Senate that is controlled by the Democrats, we will not recognize our country. And so how do you defend against that? Well, you defend against that by having rallies, especially if you're Donald Trump, because your rallies are highly effective. You've been able to bring a lot of new congressmen who have defeated Democrats into the Congress. And you have played defense in the Senate, where you had many more Republican seats up than Democrat seats. So you naturally have a rally in Georgia, and you say, hey, please come to my rally. But you don't have to go. And this is what I don't understand about Chris Wallace. In fact, quite frankly, I, at this particular point in time, don't understand why Fox News has allowed Chris Wallace to go on in this way. I'm not saying that they should fire Chris Wallace. I'm not saying that they should censor Chris Wallace. But I do feel like there is some benefit for other talking heads on Fox News to maybe bring Chris Wallace himself onto their program and ask Chris Wallace questions. Like, you know, Chris, it is not, you know, Vice President Joe Biden is the vice president. He isn't the president-elect, number one, because of the Constitution of the United States, which matters. And in addition to that, people get to choose Chris Wallace as to whether they go to these particular, you know, rallies or not in Georgia. And oh, by the way, Chris, Republicans actually do believe, rightfully so, as I do, that we are in this epic battle for our country. They know that. We all know this to be the case. I think that would be helpful if Fox News had Chris Wallace on in another program and people actually asked him critical questions like that. But I think that most of the commentators and most of the reporters and most of the talking heads on Fox News are terrified of Chris Wallace. I'm absolutely convinced they are terrified of him because I think he must have an inordinate amount of power at that particular news outlet. And should he be able to have people on his program and say what he wants? Sure. But he should also be questioned himself about the fact that he is clearly over the top, biased, and he's definitely a Trump hater. No doubt about it. And it shows more and more each day because he's literally getting stressed out and getting hives, Chris Wallace is, because he's terrified that Donald Trump might actually prevail in his election challenges. And that's why he wants to make sure that Joe Biden is called president-elect. And that's Chris Wallace has president-elect meltdown. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Colonel Waldron discusses voting systems. Yes, Colonel Waldron discusses voting systems with Lou Dobbs. So Lou Dobbs is a commentator on Fox News and business policy expert, newsman, of course, and I think he's the anchor of their news channel, Lou Dobbs is, and he interviews Colonel Waldron. So Colonel Waldron is a retired Army colonel. His name is Phil Waldron, and he's a cybersecurity expert. And he has clearly been working with the Trump team on the Dominion voting machine issues, as well as, cybersecurity issues, and to try to look at whether or not any machines had been hacked or other ways that machines could be manipulated. This is important. Why is this important? Well, this is important because so many Americans believe that there was massive election fraud. And they feel like there was election fraud in two basic areas, okay? Area number one, mail-in ballots, and area number two, the Dominion voting systems. I'm not an expert on this subject matter. In fact, most everyone isn't an expert. All I can do is play this information for you and have you make your own decision. We will comment on these various clips that we're gonna play for you. I think we have 5 clips. They're very helpful to listen to because at least it elicits critical thinking about what is possible with these machines. And then you can ask yourself the question, well, does it make sense? Does it sound valid? Why do we have these machines, these particular machines, if there are so many flaws in them? Well, first up, Lou Dobbs asks Colonel Waldron, what is behind the massive election fraud? We have this question from Lou Dobbs in its completion on purpose because then we're going to have the clips from Colonel Waldron. So here is that clip. Here it is.
Give us your sense of who is driving all of this. We know the Dems are. We know the deep state has had other areas of responsibility in this overall attack. I mean, we're talking about command and control. The President of the United States is being censored by Silicon Valley and social media. We are also watching this disinformation campaign waged by social media against the conservatives in this country, Republicans, and without consequence. Give us your sense of exactly who is driving this.
So you have social media that is censoring the president, and that is a fact, okay? Social media is also censoring many supporters of the president. That is a fact. We have allegations of massive election fraud from the mail-in ballots, and we have allegations of election fraud of the Dominion voting machines. And so here's Colonel Waldron's response concerning generally what's happening from the 1,000-foot view as it relates to these machines. Interesting clip, and here it is.
I spent the better part of my career studying warfare, unconventional warfare, and understanding the dynamics of how things are run. In an unconventional warfare, you've got the underground, which is the covert piece of the unconventional warfare that drive intelligence, money, and ideology. You generally have a shadow government, a government in exile, and then the guerrilla forces and the auxiliary. So all of those pieces you can really template into what's happening here.
So a shadow government in exile, which is necessary in order for there to be some sort of motivation to go forward and try to manipulate voting machines and voting outcomes. And then you have information warfare, and information warfare is the side of the shadow government that uses social media to censor people and to censor stories that may be less than positive for Joe Biden, like the Hunter Biden story. Well, this is kind of making sense, right? But the shadow government in exile, that's kind of interesting. And that's also what we're calling this podcast, right? Shadow government. What does that mean? Who would the shadow government be? Who would be behind it and why, right? They would obviously have a motivation. And the motivation is probably a lot more than just getting rid of Donald Trump. And we've played other clips in the past, and we've talked about this in the past on this podcast, about how Barack Obama in particular wants to get rid of the Electoral College, wants to get rid of 2 United States senators for small states like Wyoming and Montana and so forth. He wants to allow unbridled immigration, illegal immigration into the United States, and he wants there to be things like free college and free health care for everyone, including those illegal immigrants who come into the United States. He wants to have no borders, and he wants to admit D.C. and Puerto Rico into the United States. In other words, Barack Obama wants to completely and utterly get rid of the Constitution of the United States and have no checks and balances in government whatsoever. We know that for a fact because we've actually played those clips for you from Barack Obama when he was talking to Charlemagne the God on The Breakfast Club. And then here we have Colonel Waldron. He's talking about information warfare and the fact that there might be a government in exile. He doesn't refer to who that is specifically. You know, I think most of our podcast listeners think that that would probably be Barack Obama because Obama's the only president that I'm aware of in American history who never left Washington, D.C. You know, he took that helicopter from the White House 4 years ago when he was, of course, replaced by Donald Trump because obviously Barack Obama was termed out. And where did he go? Well, he just went right up the street and bought a house in Kalorama in Washington, D.C. I've forgotten how much the house cost, but it's many, many millions of dollars. Stayed in Washington, D.C. Why? Usually presidents are like, man, this has been a great run. I'm totally burned out. I need to rejuvenate and go back to my private life where I can just live like everybody else. Not Barack Obama. He's not done. He's not done at all. And I think that's probably who Colonel Waldron was referring to. Interestingly enough, you can believe what you want to believe, right? We can all believe what we're going to believe, but there is enough evidence of what has happened leading up to this election and since, and enough questions that we need to answer these questions. We must answer these questions. And we're going to get to why we must answer these questions. And I'm even going to give you an example in my own state of what they're up to prove my point. So here's Colonel Waldron about the Dominion machines themselves, also talking again about information warfare. And polling devices can be repaired remotely because, I don't know, people said they're not connected to the internet. Well, here's what Colonel Waldron says about that. We have that clip, and here it is.
You mentioned specifically Dominion, and I think what this is a situation that it's not easy to understand. It's a complex situation that there's been a narrative built around it. And again, narrative warfare is a real part of information warfare and information operations. Right. Part of the narrative is that these machines are not connected to the internet. And I don't know if you saw the Georgia testimony yesterday. A lady that testified just a few minutes after I did said that she got to her polling place. The systems were coded for a different polling place. She called the help desk in Colorado, and they were able to fix both of her polling pads as well as the scanning, the ballot recording devices. So the fallacy that these systems are not connected to the internet is just beyond my grasp.
This is critically important information, okay? This is a retired colonel who's saying on a legit business news program and putting all of his reputation on the line here that polling devices were indeed repaired remotely the day of the election. And those polling devices included her pad, I guess, her iPad, as well as the actual scanning device. And she had to call, I believe he said, Colorado, At least that's where we think she called. And they made those repairs remotely. So interesting, right? Because the whole idea of voting machines, in order for them to be truly independent and unhackable, would be that they're not in any way, shape, or form connected to anything, especially the day before or the day of the election when you're actually counting. Just doesn't make sense. So we also have, here's Colonel Waldron's comments on USB drives. So I know, look, podcast listeners, you're probably saying, USB drives, you know that little thing that you plug into the side of your laptop or your computer? Many computers don't even support them anymore. You have to get you have to get a device to be able to help you use the USB drive to be able to plug it in to your computer. And my computer is that way now too. I actually had to buy a second device so that the old USBs that I have, I could actually see because they had PDF documents on them that I wanted to see. Well, apparently, USB devices aren't just for PDF documents and documents in general. You can do other things with them. And for whatever reason, the Dominion voting systems have USB devices that are utilized on the systems. And Colonel Waldron talks about this and talks about why that is a problem. We have that clip, and here it is.
These systems all have backdoors. These systems all have multiple, you mentioned a sleight of hand with USB drives. There was photographs of a gentleman in Pennsylvania walking around with a Ziploc bag of USB drives, not to mention that a batch of those USB drives in a laptop were stolen from the election storage facility, I believe on September the 30th, so a month before the elections. And those USB drives can be built to bypass encryption, to upload different algorithms in the voting software. So they're easy to conceal and to move, like you said, the sleight of hand.
So the USB drives can be built to bypass the encryption that protects the system. And obviously, the USB drives, in theory, would also have many votes on them as well that could be uploaded remotely. The votes could have been pre-recorded on the USB drive, and then the USB drive could then be plugged into the Dominion system the day of the election, and they could have been uploaded to the system. And all of these votes, no one knows where they came from, right? I'm talking about, in theory, what could happen. And that's what Colonel Waldron is talking about. He also gave some examples of things that did happen, like USB drives were actually stolen in September. This is problematic, folks, because what kind of voting machine uses USB drives? I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense. You know, why would you? I'm not an expert on voting machines, okay? I'm not. But why would you use USB drives? It just seems kind of obvious, because anytime I want to share a document with somebody and I don't feel like sending it over the internet for whatever reason, I can put it on a USB drive and just say, hey, here's the USB drive. Clearly, these are things that are quite shareable, and USB drives can hold an enormous amount of data, including an enormous amount of almost unlimited amount of votes, if that's really what your goal is. But we don't know, of course. We don't really probably have the time to look into all this. Nonetheless, Colonel Waldron is the expert who is looking into it. So Lou Dobbs asks Colonel Waldron, is there any evidence of foreign involvement? I mean, that's really where all this is headed, right? Is there evidence of foreign involvement? And, well, Colonel Waldron has some interesting things to say about that, and here's the clip.
The organizational structure of these companies, they have some circular business arrangements. The Seidel, which is the company that owns Clarity Elections, which provides election night aggregation and reporting to the media. It's a U.S.-owned. It is a U.S.-owned company, but it's owned by Seidel in Barcelona, Spain. Seidel went bankrupt in May. It was a very unique bankruptcy situation in May of 2020, and appears to be purchased by a UK company called Paragon, which also has a very circular ownership pattern. So in other words, the Paragon is owned in part by one of its subsidiaries. So there are a lot of things that are just not quite right. One of our investigators found a co-located facility in Barbados that both SGO Smartmatic and Dominion share as a registered business address.
So there's circular ownership of a lot of different companies, all of which are interrelated in the Dominion voting machines. This is what we do know. And we also do know that there is significant foreign involvement in these companies. So there is indeed foreign involvement in these particular companies. We do know this for sure. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, why isn't there more transparency about this? And why hasn't there been prior to this election? Why is this allowed to go on for so long? Why has it been allowed to go on for so long? And this is what I can tell you about government as a result of being in government for a while, in particular in elective office. And I was even on the committee that deals with election law. And I can tell you, it's pretty interesting to see what so many people are trying to do in election law subcommittees and in committees that deal with election law itself. And this is what I can tell you about government. Government is always very slow to respond to technological changes. Case in point, the unemployment insurance systems across America, which have been overwhelmed, right, because of the pandemic. People have been put out of work because of government, because there have been mandated shutdowns, and there have been curfews, so companies have had to close, some permanently. So you have all of these people who have been on unemployment, and the unemployment insurance systems run by government can't even keep up. Now, these same governments are really good at making sure you as a business owner pay your unemployment insurance to them, and they're quick to make sure that you pay it and will shut you down very quickly if you don't. But when it comes time for the for the unemployed people needing that insurance, that same government, very difficult to get a response, right? And this is not a hit, of course, on the individuals who are working in government trying to do the right thing. It's just the way government seems to work. And I'm not here to make excuses for it, right? It's the opposite. It's the opposite. And this goes to election law and running elections. Government is so slow to understand the technological changes and the ability of technology, because it is advancing so quickly, to be used to cheat on elections or to undermine elections, or at the very least to undermine the credibility of elections and make us believe or think that there is that strong possibility that something has indeed happened. I don't know. I started out this segment by saying, I don't know. I'm not an expert on voting machines, okay? But what I do know is when I hear things like USBs are still used on Dominion voting machines, and that there is significant foreign involvement in the companies themselves that actually have manufactured the software and or hardware of these machines, that there are servers in different countries and there are relationships in different countries that are selling us these machines. And that we're being told by Dominion that they're not connected to the internet, when in fact Dominion can repair software matters and issues online the day of or the day before the election. There are issues here, right? And transparency is the key in government. Here's what I find that's interesting. Why wouldn't either party be interested in creating as much transparency, not just about Dominion, but about the voting systems throughout the United States? Why wouldn't there be maximum transparency? What would you be afraid of? What would you be afraid of? What would you be concerned about? And here's a case in point. In my state, we did voting by mail, not exclusively, but bigger than ever. In other words, everyone was mailed an invitation, if you will, to apply and get a ballot online. So you received this paper, and it had your name on it, and it looked like an official ballot. And technically, it was official in that if you filled it out and mailed it in, you would be mailed a ballot, right? Well, I had 4 mailed to my house. Technically, I had 4 mailed to my house. And I'm not going to tell you how many people in my house live there anymore, but it's not 4 people. So it would be real easy for me to move forward and send all 4 in and cheat. And I have no doubt this happened across the state in which I live. So everybody got these requests mailed to them. They didn't ask for them, they were mailed to them. And so if there are just 2 in my household, what is the average household that got the same, issue that I did? They got more ballots to their household than what they requested. I think many, many, many. And I think that this opens the door for fraud, right? Yet, and here's where I'm going with this, yet the Democrat Party in my state, you know what they want to do in the 2021 legislative session? They actually want to make that permanent. So we only did the mail-out requests for ballots to everybody in the state because of the pandemic. Now, the Democrat Party wants to make that permanent because they see an advantage. And what is the advantage? The advantage is to cheat. And this is the same Democrat Party, ladies and gentlemen, in the state of Maryland, where I live, okay? I'm just giving you the example of where I live. This is the same Democrat Party in Maryland who every year in the legislature won't even allow the bill that requires a photo ID when you vote to be voted upon. In other words, you put a bill in for photo ID and the Democrats are like, well, we're going to put that in the drawer or the trash can. We're not going to allow anyone to vote on it because we don't want the Democrats to go on record voting against it. So therefore, the bill dies on its own accord. And therefore, we don't have photo ID when you vote. And of course, now, if you're going to have mail-in balloting, and we're going to continue to expand that. We're going to make permanent this year for every future year. And clearly, that's what the Democrats want to do, is to make this permanent. Well, clearly, you're not going to have photo ID because if you're mailing your ballot in, how do you show the person? Because there's no person to show your photo ID to. So we don't have it. And it is rife for fraud. And I have no doubt this election in our state, we had many, many thousands of ballots that were mailed in by households where only 2 people lived in the household, but the household mailed in 4 ballots because they had the opportunity to vote for children who had long since left, or renters who had long since left, or you name the 1,000 different cases that could have happened. And so I just don't understand why we have a Democrat Party in the 21st century who absolutely fears simple voter integrity and fears transparency. But that's where we are. And so for all of you podcast listeners that are out there, that you've decided, oh my gosh, that Mark Fisher, he's trying to talk about conspiracy because, his podcast is called Shadow Government, or he's trying to talk about conspiracies because, he thinks there was massive voter fraud. Here's what I can tell you 100%. Because we're just discussing this. We're trying to elicit comments. We're trying to elicit critical thinking. There's no doubt with the mail-in ballots that there was fraud, okay? No doubt. There's no doubt in my mind. And if you get a few thousand mail-in ballots in many districts across the state, and each district has just a few thousand fraudulent ballots, that can tip an election in any given district. And the Democrats know that, and that's exactly what they want to do. Because that's exactly why the Democrat Party on the national level filed more than 300 lawsuits in swing states. Think about that. More than 300 lawsuits in swing states were filed by the Democrat Party, the Democrat National Committee, and their operatives, the crooked lawyers who work for them, in swing states. To do what? To make voting nonstop until they got the actual result that they wanted. To expand mail-in balloting so that it was universal mail-in balloting, and to not have the systems in place. I'm not really sure the systems in place could exist anyway to protect the vote. And then in Pennsylvania, as we all know, you can even mail in your ballot 3 days later. I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. So in most of those states, certainly in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, as an example, as 2 examples, the state constitutions themselves were violated with the last minute changes in voting. And I think most voters don't even know that, but who was behind it? It was the Democrat lawyers who were filing all of these lawsuits to change everything. So I just got to tell you, it's now happening in our state. They always say, never let an emergency pass you by without trying to change, the way things are done. That's kind of the way the Democrats do things, and certainly in my state with voting, that appears to be what their first priority is in 2021. So next up, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. That's right, Go Woke or Go Broke, and it is CNBC is for big business. CNBC is all about big business and big business only. We're going to talk about that in great detail in this Go Woke or Go Broke segment. But first up, CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin, he's one of their anchors there at CNBC. He got into an argument with Rick Santelli about small businesses and about the coronavirus and how there have been shutdowns, and the shutdowns have been uneven and unfair. This is an epic battle. I mean, an epic battle, and you have to see this. And so, first up is CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin talking about the small business issue, and then we have kind of, the woke conversation about why these businesses, some businesses are better than others. We have a couple of clips about this, and here's the first clip.
I believe in careful. And when I point out governors cheating, it's not for the hypocrisy which exists. It's the fact that I think many of these governors are intelligent people and they love their families, which they've taken out into restaurants. Therefore, there is actually and should be an ongoing debate as to, why a parking lot for a big box store like by my house is jam-packed. Not one parking spot open. Why are those people any safer than a restaurant with plexiglass? I just don't get it. And I think there's a million of these questions that could be asked. And I think it's really sad that when we look at the service sector and all the discussions we've had about job losses, that particular dynamic isn't studied more.
So that's Rick Santelli, right? So Rick Santelli, of course, is talking about the fact that it's not fair that these small businesses, in particular restaurants, in Rick Santelli's opinion, have been shut down. And of course, I would agree with him. And he talks about the fact that you have the big box stores, of course. Parking lots are absolutely full and people are going inside and there are hundreds of people inside, which, by the way, is true. And that was Rick Santelli on CNBC. But Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's the CNBC host, actually has, the very virtuous response to Rick Santelli. And you're not going to be able to believe, you just won't believe, how arrogant and smug Andrew Ross Sorkin is on CNBC. Because it's just all about big business, but they're couching it in the term of safety. And if they really believed in safety, CNBC did, they really believed in safety, because it's a business channel talking about businesses, who's open and who's closed, then CNBC would say, well, everything should be shut down, right? You got to order everything by mail if they really believed in safety. If that's really, really what they wanted. It's not what they want, ladies and gentlemen. We know it. We have this clip from Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC. This is his response to Rick Santelli, and here it is.
Just as a public health and public service announcement for the audience, the difference between a big box retailer.
Who is this?
Hold on. The difference between it's Andrew.
Who else?
The difference between a big box retailer. Hold on. The difference between a big box retailer and a restaurant, or frankly even a church, are so different. It's unbelievable. Going into a big box retailer,
I disagree.
You're wearing a mask.
You can have your thoughts and I can have mine.
You're required to wear a mask.
I disagree.
It's science. I'm sorry. It's science. If you're
It's
wearing a
not
mask,
science.
it's a different story.
500 people at a Lowe's aren't any safer than 150 people in a restaurant that holds 600. I don't believe it. Sorry. Don't believe it. And I live in an area where there's a lot of restaurants that have fought back and they don't have any problems. And they're open.
Okay. You don't have to believe it, but let me just say this. You're doing a disservice to the viewer because the viewers need to understand it.
You are doing a disservice to the viewer. You are. You are.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I would like to keep our viewers as healthy as humanly possible. The idea of packing people into restaurants.
I think our viewers are smart enough to make part of those decisions on their own. I don't think that I'm much smarter than all the viewers like some people do.
So that's CNBC, right? And that was Andrew Ross Sorkin pontificating about how you have to, be safe, and which is obvious, of course. But Andrew Ross Sorkin is, I'm just trying to keep people safe. That's why I think restaurants should be shut down. That's why I think gyms should be shut down, and that's why Home Depot should be opened. Look, CNBC is the business channel of NBC, which also owns MSNBC and Comcast and Universal. I mean, it is a far left woke corporation, which is why we have them on this Go Woke or Go Broke segment. And CNBC is all about the big businesses, right? Because there's a partnership in America now today that is very unique, and it's between the very large businesses and the left. We see that with the tech businesses and the left, and of course, even the business channels like CNBC have made this partnership as well. And what they're saying is, through Andrew Ross Sorkin, you just heard it, he's saying, you know what? I'm okay with these small little businesses being affected. In fact, they can even be shut down. They can go out of business because it's science. And I'm trying to keep people healthy. It's science. But the people in Home Depot, there are 400 people there. That's okay because it's Home Depot. That's a really big corporation. And that's essential. Eating isn't essential, but, going to Home Depot, that's got to be essential because it's a big corporation. It's absolutely nonsense what is happening in our economy because, and I know I'm going to get hit with this too, which is why I always put the caveats in, because I put the caveats in a million times and I'm going to have to do it again in this particular segment. It's up to you if you want to go to Home Depot. You don't have to go. Don't go. If you don't have to go out to a restaurant and eat, don't go. If you're afraid of getting COVID, don't go. How many times do we have to say it? But if you own a restaurant, you should be able to keep it opened as long as you want to. You should be able to keep your restaurant open, serve food, serve alcohol as long as you want to, because you are not less essential than Home Depot. You are just as essential because you are a human being and it is your business, and individuals can make their own decisions as to whether they want to walk into your establishment. It's pretty obvious, but not CNBC. CNBC thinks that shouldn't be allowed. Only the big businesses should be rewarded. And it's so obvious that this incredibly woke business channel owned by NBC, Comcast, Universal, whatever they call themselves these days, this massive corporation themselves, they don't care what they're doing to the average family, to the small businesses, which they're just crushing these businesses across America. It's just disgusting. It's really disgusting. And of course, we have Rick Santelli that says at the end of that clip, he goes, you know what? People can make their minds up themselves. It's up to them. They can do it. We all know this is obvious, right? This is obvious. But for some reason, we have to keep saying it because we're going to keep being hit by the Andrew Ross Sorkins of the world. By we, I mean conservatives. We're going to be hit by the Andrew Ross Sorkins of the world on CNBC saying, you don't want to keep people safe. I want to keep people more safe than you want to keep people safe. And it's just not true, ladies and gentlemen. It's simply not true. We have a personal responsibility to keep ourselves safe. And if we think for 1 minute that we don't want to go to a rally, fine, don't go. We don't want to go to a restaurant because we're afraid of COVID, don't go. We don't want to go to Home Depot, don't go. Up to you, your life, you get to decide. You can continue to order in from Amazon and your food and so forth, or you can get people out to the grocery store to buy the food for you. There's so many options to stay safer if that's really what is most important to you and you've decided that you're going to put your life on hold, and maybe it actually makes sense because you have a comorbidity and you are very susceptible to dying if you get COVID. I get it. But the world can't stop, okay? The world must go on, and those who aren't concerned about it can continue to live their lives, and people still have to make a living, not just the big corporations that are connected to the left and to the business channels. So to prove that, are you essential, right? This is the whole thing. Little restaurant, oh, you're not essential because you're not connected. The small gym, you're not essential because you're not connected to power either. You know who really says this the best is Governor DeSantis of Florida, because Florida is open. Right? Florida is open for business. You know who lives in Florida? You know what Florida has more than any other state, I believe? It has one of the oldest populations in the United States because that's where so many people go to retire, right? They go to Florida to retire. So they have a disproportionate number of people who are probably very susceptible to dying from COVID. Yet Florida's been open this entire time, during the entire pandemic, including the Florida schools, by the way, which we talked about the other day. So we have a clip from Governor DeSantis talking about this very thing. Who's essential? Can't say it better than Governor DeSantis. Here's that clip.
And my view is that everybody's essential. Who is government to say that your job is not essential? I think it is essential. I think some of the stuff in March and April didn't work. I think you have to let people earn a living. And it's really not even government's role to say who could pick and choose. So we want everyone to have gainful employment. We want businesses to be able to operate. And I think that that's a better approach in terms of understanding that the virus is a problem, we need to deal with it, but you also have to deal with all of society.
Yeah, so kind of common sense, right? Everybody's essential. And God help us if Joe Biden actually does become the president-elect. God help us, because all he wants to talk about is it's going to be a cold, dark winter. You know, I mean, that's what these people believe in. It's not going to be a cold, dark winter, though, if you own, Home Depot, or if you own a big corporation that is still open because you're connected. No, it's going to be a really cold, dark winter for all the small businesses out there, because Joe Biden's going to make sure that you are crushed because you're not woke. And that's go woke or go broke. CNB is for big business. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. I want to thank Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer. Also, check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.